Mireille Voss had been kneeling in the mud for 7 minutes before she realized the man breathing shallowly against the embankment was not, in any ordinary sense, alive. She had come down to the canal path because her landlady's cat had gone missing again, and Mireille was the sort of woman who could not hear about a lost animal without doing something about it. It was a flaw she had never managed to correct, even in the years when she had lived in houses large enough that the servants handled such things. Those years were gone now, 3 years gone to be precise, ever since her father's business partner had presented his forgeries to the courts, and her father's estate had dissolved like sugar in warm water, leaving Mireille at 31, with a small valise, a good education, and no prospects that anyone in Vienna's society considered relevant. She had found work as a translator, French, Italian, a serviceable Hungarian. It was honest work, if solitary, and it kept her in a rented room on the Josefstadter Strasse with enough coal to last until February. She had stopped expecting more than that. But the man on the canal bank was not a problem she could translate away. He was tall. She could tell even collapsed as he was, one arm thrown over his face, his coat dark with canal water. His skin, where she could see it at his throat, was the color of old candle wax. No color in the lips. She pressed 2 fingers to his wrist, the way she had seen a physician do it once, and found something. Not quite a pulse, but a tremor, like a clock that had nearly wound down. "Sir?" she said. Then, more firmly, "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyes opened. They were a dark amber, the color of old cognac held up to firelight, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel briefly transparent, as though he were reading something written on the back of her ribs. "You should not be here," he said. His voice was accented, not Viennese, not quite anything she could place. "That is a rather ungrateful observation," Mireille said, "from a man lying in a ditch." Something shifted in his expression, not quite surprise, more like recalibration. He tried to sit up. She put her shoulder under his arm without being asked, because there was nothing else to do. And he was heavy in a way that seemed wrong for his frame. Heavy the way marble is heavy, dense and cold and unyielding. She noticed that. She filed it away and kept moving. She got him to the steps of the canal wall, to the covered archway where the old boatman's storage had been abandoned. He sank onto the stone bench inside, and she gave him her coat, because he was shivering in a way that did not look like ordinary cold. It looked like something being withheld. "You need a physician," she said. "No," he said. "I need time." She studied him. He was perhaps 40, or appeared so, though something about the quality of his stillness suggested that appearance was a costume he wore rather than a truth. His hands, folded in his lap, were perfectly steady despite the shivering. His eyes were clear. Whatever was wrong with him, it was not what was wrong with ordinary men. "I will wait," she said, because she could not leave him, and because the cat was almost certainly home by now anyway. She waited. He breathed, or did something that resembled breathing closely enough to pass. After an hour, color returned to his face, not warmth precisely, but presence. He looked at her with those amber eyes and said, "You are not afraid." "I am practical," Mireille said. "Fear is expensive, and I am on a budget." He almost smiled. It was the kind of almost smile that costs something to produce. "What is your name?" he said. She told him. He did not offer his in return, which she noted. He stood, steadier now, and returned her coat with a small formal bow that belonged to a different century. Then he walked away into the dark of the canal path, and she let him go, because she did not know what else to do with him. She did not sleep well that night. She told herself it was the cold. It was not the cold. 3 days passed, then 4. On the 5th day, a woman came to her door. She was perhaps 60, dressed in black with a quality of stillness that reminded Mireille unpleasantly of the man in the ditch. She had eyes the color of deep water, and she carried a card, which she presented without preamble. "You rendered assistance," the woman said, To someone who cannot safely be in debt. Mireille took the card. It read, in very small print, Countess Aurelia Dravek, in matters of the old compact. I don't know what that means, Mireille said. It means, the Countess said, that you have activated a vampiric oath of obligation. The man you helped is Count Nikolai Sareny of the House of Dravek. He is very old and very bound by very old laws. By helping him when he was reduced, you created a blood debt in the old tradition. She paused. He is now obligated to you, as are by extension those who stand with him. Mireille stared at her. That is, she said carefully, a great deal to absorb on a Thursday morning. I imagine so, the Countess said, with something that might have been sympathy. He will come to explain. When he does, I suggest you let him finish before you respond. A pause. He has not explained this to a mortal in some time. He may be clumsy about it. She left. Mireille closed the door, stood very still in her small room with its translation work stacked on the table and its single window overlooking the street, and understood that something had changed in the architecture of her life, though she could not yet see the shape of the change. She dreamed of amber eyes that night. She had dreamed of them before, she realized, years ago, at a garden party in the days when she still attended garden parties. A man standing at the edge of the gathering, watching the fountain rather than the people. She had been 19 and had thought him the most interesting person in the room, and had never learned his name, and had thought of him perhaps twice in the years since. She thought of him now with the sudden vertiginous certainty that it had been the same man. Count Nikolai Sareny arrived on a Tuesday evening, with no warning and a very good coat. He knocked with the precise formality of someone who had spent centuries practicing the art of not frightening people, and had not entirely mastered it. Mireille opened the door. She looked at him for a long moment. At the amber eyes, the stillness, the face that had not aged a day in 12 years, and said, You were at the Hoffmann garden party in 1867. You stood by the fountain for 2 hours and spoke to no one. He went very still. I was 19, she said. I thought you were the most peculiar and interesting man I had ever seen. You disappeared before supper and I never knew your name. She stepped back from the door. Come in, Count Sareny. Your countess tells me you have something to explain. He came in. He sat in the chair she indicated with the careful precision of someone accustomed to being in rooms where he did not belong. He looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. Searching, a little lost, the way people look when they are trying to remember something that should be easy. I don't remember you, he said. It cost him something to say it. She could see that. I know, she said. Explain the debt. He explained. It took some time. The old compact, he said, was older than the Habsburg Empire, older than Vienna itself, a framework of obligation that governed relations between his kind and those who aided them in moments of genuine vulnerability. It was not metaphorical. It was not symbolic. It was as binding as a legal contract and considerably harder to dissolve. By pulling him from the canal bank, by staying, by giving him warmth and time and her coat, she had, in the language of the compact, performed an act of sovereign shelter. He owed her, in the formal sense, a debt that could not be discharged by money or gratitude alone. It ties you to me, he said, and me to you. Others of my kind will know of it. Some will find it inconvenient. Mireille had been quiet through all of this. She had listened with the focused attention she brought to difficult legal documents, the kind that required her to hold many clauses in her mind simultaneously. Now, she said, you are telling me that without my consent, without any knowledge of what I was doing, I have been bound by a supernatural legal framework to a vampire I met in a ditch. Yes, he said. And I had no choice in the matter. No. And now I am, what? Obligated to you, or you to me, or both of us to each other equally, in a situation neither of us chose. The last, he said, though the danger falls more heavily on you. She stood up. She walked to the window. She stood there for a long moment looking at the street below, at the ordinary Tuesday evening of Vienna, proceeding without any awareness of vampiric compacts or canal bank rescues or women who had once watched a strange man at a fountain and never forgotten him. "I am angry," she said to the window. "That is reasonable," he said behind her. "I am not asking your opinion of my anger." She turned around. "I have spent 3 years rebuilding a life that was destroyed by someone else's choices. I am very tired of having my circumstances altered by events I did not initiate and cannot control. I do not want a debt. I do not want a compact. I want my translation work, and my landlady's cat, and my small room, and my ordinary life, and you have made that considerably more complicated." He looked at her steadily. He did not apologize, which she respected more than she would have respected an apology. "I know," he said. "Can it be broken?" she said. "The debt." "I am trying to determine that," he said. "There are records, very old ones, in my library in the Palais Sereni. I have been searching them. And—" a pause. "It is not simple." "Nothing useful ever is," she said. She sat back down. "Tell me what you know." The danger the Countess Aurelia had hinted at materialized 11 days later in the form of a man named Benedict Orvar. Mireille had never met him, but she knew the name. It appeared in the old records she had begun researching herself, because she was not the sort of woman who waited for someone else to solve her problems. She had gone to the Imperial Library and asked, very specifically, about historical records of aristocratic compact law, and a helpful young archivist had produced 3 volumes of dubious legal history that she had taken home and read with the same methodical attention she gave to difficult translations. Orvar was older than Sereni, considerably older, if the records were accurate. He had been a figure in the old vampire court for centuries, and his particular interest was in compacts, specifically in acquiring them, absorbing them, using the obligations they created as instruments of leverage. He had done it before. The records were not explicit about what had happened to the mortals involved, but the language used, released from obligation, circumstances resolved, the debt retired, had the careful euphemism of documents written by people who did not want to say what they meant. When he came to her door, she already knew who he was. He was a small man, which surprised her. She had expected someone imposing. He was neat and compact, and he smiled with all the warmth of a contract clause, and he said, "Mademoiselle Voss, I represent certain interests that have a stake in the Sareni Compact. I have come to offer you a resolution." "Come in," she said, because she needed to hear what he intended, and because she had already sent a note to Sareni's address. Orvar sat. He explained with great courtesy and great precision that the compact could be dissolved if she signed a document transferring her position in it, her rights, her obligations, her standing as the sheltering party, to a third entity. That entity, he said, would be himself. "And what happens to Count Sareni if I do that?" she said. "He becomes obligated to me," Orvar said, "as he should have been some time ago. He has avoided certain responsibilities to the old court. This would resolve that." "And what happens to me?" "You are free," he said. "Entirely. No compact, no debt, no further involvement." She looked at him. She thought about her small room and her translation work and her ordinary life. She thought about the man at the fountain who had not remembered her. She thought about 12 years and a canal bank and a coat given without thinking. "No," she said. Orvar's courtesy did not waver. "I would encourage you to reconsider," he said. "The alternative is that you remain bound to a situation that will become increasingly visible. There are those in the old court who will not be patient. Your position is not comfortable." "My position," she said, has not been comfortable for 3 years. I am accustomed to it. She stood. I think you should leave. He left, but she heard, from the quality of his departure, the unhurried step, the absence of any concession, that he was not finished. Sareni arrived within the hour, which meant he had received her note and come immediately, which meant he had been nearby, which she filed away and thought about later. She told him what had happened. He listened with his face very still and his amber eyes doing something complicated that she was beginning to learn to read. He cannot compel you to sign, Sarani said. Not directly. The compact protects you from direct coercion. But not from indirect pressure, she said. No. Then we need to find another way, she said quickly. What have the records shown? He was quiet for a moment. There is a mechanism, he said, older than the compact itself, a voluntary transformation of the debt, from obligation into something else. But it requires… He stopped. What does it require? It requires that the debt be acknowledged as freely given, he said. Not as an accident, not as obligation, but as choice. Both parties must stand before witnesses of the old court and declare that the original act, the shelter, the aid, was given and received as a gift, not a transaction. If that is accepted, the compact dissolves. There is no debt because there was no exchange, only generosity. She considered this. And the witnesses of the old court, Orvar would be among them? He would have to be, Sareni said. He is senior enough that his acknowledgement is required. He won't acknowledge it willingly, she said. He benefits from the debt standing. No, Sareni said. He won't. She had been working on the problem for 2 days when she found what she needed in the third of the library volumes, a provision she had almost missed, buried in a footnote in archaic German that her translation skills were, for once, genuinely useful for. She read it twice. Then she went to find Sareni. She had begun going to the Palais Sareni in the evenings, which was where the library was and where the relevant records were kept, and which was also, she acknowledged to herself, where Sareni was. The Palais was large and very cold, and filled with things that had been accumulating for several centuries: books, instruments, maps, objects whose purpose she could not always identify. She had begun to find it comfortable, which surprised her. She had lived in a large house once. She had not expected to feel at home in one again. She found him in the library, surrounded by the same records she had been working through. He looked up when she came in, and something in the quality of his attention, the way he turned toward her, the way the room seemed to settle, made her understand that he had been waiting for her, specifically, and that this was not new. I found something, she said, and put the book in front of him, her finger on the footnote. He read it again. Then he looked at her with an expression that was, for the first time since she had known him, entirely unguarded. You read archaic Bavarian legal German, he said. I read everything, she said. The provision. Is it valid? It is very old, he said. Old enough that Orvar may not know it exists. He looked at the page again. It allows the sheltering party to testify before the court in their own voice, not through a representative, not filtered through compact law, directly. He paused. If you speak, and the court accepts your testimony, Orvar cannot override it. The seniority provision that gives him power in the compact proceeding does not apply to direct testimony from a mortal witness. Then I need to speak, she said, in front of the court. He looked at her steadily. Mireille, he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. They are not. They will not be easy to face. The old court is not accustomed to mortal women standing before it and making arguments. I am not accustomed to being told what I am allowed to do, she said. We will manage. The old court of the Viennese Vampire Compact convened in a building that looked, from the outside, like an unremarkable legal archive on the Herrengasse. Inside, it was something else entirely. High ceilings, very old stone, the smell of beeswax and dust and time. There were perhaps 20 figures present, seated in a semicircle, And Orvar was among them, near the center, with the careful stillness of a man who has already decided the outcome. Zareni stood beside her. He had offered to stand in front of her, which she had declined. The presiding figure, an ancient woman with white hair and eyes the pale gray of winter sky, looked at Mireille with the focused attention of someone who did not often bother to look at mortals directly. "You invoke the mortal witness provision," she said. "I do," Mireille said. Her voice was steady. She had been a banker's daughter. She had sat at formal tables since she was old enough to understand what they meant. She understood this table. "Speak then," Mireille spoke. Mireille, she told them what had happened on the canal bank. Not the version that made her heroic, not the version that made her a victim of circumstance. The true version, which was that she had seen a man in distress and had done what anyone with a functioning conscience would do. She told them about the coat. She told them about waiting. She told them that she had not known what he was, and that if she had known, she would have done the same thing, because the alternative was leaving someone to die in the cold, and that was not something she was capable of. She told them that Benedict Orvar had come to her door and offered to dissolve the compact in exchange for her signature, and that she had refused, and that she understood what that refusal had cost her, and that she would refuse again if asked. She told them that the act on the canal bank had not been a transaction. It had not been performed in expectation of return. It had been given freely, and if the compact's own law recognized the difference between a gift and an exchange, then there was no debt. There had never been a debt. There was only a choice she had made, and she stood by it. The room was very quiet when she finished. Orvar said, "The mortal does not understand the law she is invoking." "On the contrary," Mireille said, before anyone else could speak, "I have spent 2 weeks in an extremely comprehensive library translating documents in 4 languages. I understand the law I am invoking with considerable precision." She looked at him directly. "The provision is in the 3rd volume of the Dravek Compact Records, page 247, footnote 11. I can recite it if that would be useful." Something passed through the room, not sound exactly, but a quality of attention shifting. The presiding elder looked at Orvar. "Do you contest the provision?" Orvar was silent for a moment. He was calculating, she could see it, calculating whether he could challenge the provision, whether the challenge would hold, whether the cost of pressing further outweighed what he stood to gain. She watched him calculate and she did not look away, because she had learned, in 3 years of rebuilding her life from nothing, that looking away was what people did when they were not sure of their ground, and she was entirely sure of hers. "I do not contest it," he said at last, and the words came out with the careful flatness of a man conceding a point he had not expected to lose. The elder nodded. She looked at Mireille, and then at Zareni, and then back at Mireille, with an expression that was, very faintly, something like approval. "The compact is dissolved," she said. "The act was a gift. No debt exists. No obligation stands." A pause. "The House of Dravek is noted as having received a gift of sovereign shelter from Mireille Voss, freely given. This is recorded." It was, she would later understand, a significant thing to have recorded. It meant something in the old court's long memory. It meant that she existed in their records not as a mortal who had stumbled into their law, but as someone who had stood in their court and argued, and won. But she did not think about that immediately. What she thought about, walking out of the archive on the Herrengasse into the cold November air of Vienna, was that it was done, and that she was tired, and that Zareni was walking beside her and had not said anything for 3 blocks. She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. "You could have told me about the footnote," she said, "if you had found it first." "I hadn't found it," he said. "You found it. But if you had—" He considered this with the seriousness he brought to everything. "I don't know," he said. "I think I might have been afraid that if the compact dissolved, you would have no reason to come to the library anymore." She looked at him. The street was quiet around them. the gas lamps making small warm circles in the dark. And his face in that light was exactly as she remembered it from the garden party. The same quality of stillness, the same sense of a person who had been watching the world for so long that they had forgotten to expect anything from it. "You still don't remember me," she said. "From the Hoffman party." "No," he said. "I am sorry." "I was 19, she said. "You were standing by the fountain. I thought you were the most peculiar man I had ever seen. I thought about you for weeks afterward, and then I put it away because I didn't know your name, and it seemed impractical to think about someone you don't know." She paused. "And then I found you in a ditch, and I gave you my coat, and apparently created a supernatural legal crisis." His expression did something she had not seen it do before. It opened slightly, like a door that has been shut a very long time, and has forgotten how to move on its hinges. 12 years, he said. 12 years, she confirmed. "I have lived for several centuries," he said, "and I have been careless with faces, with names, with the people who stood at the edges of rooms." He looked at her with the amber eyes that she had seen in canal bank mud and firelight, and the cold stone of the old court. "I was careless with you." "Yes," she said, "you were." "I would like," he said carefully, "to not be careless anymore, if you are willing." She thought about her small room and her translation work. She thought about the Palais and its library and the cold rooms full of centuries of accumulated things. She thought about what it meant to rebuild a life, and whether rebuilding meant returning to what you had been or building something you had never been before. "I have conditions," she said. "I would expect nothing less," he said. "I keep my work," she said. "Translation. It is mine and I am good at it, and I will not give it up." "Of course. I am not decorative. I am not a companion or an ornament. If I am in your life, I am in it as a person with opinions and a career and a tendency to find footnotes that change everything." "I have noticed," he said, with the almost smile that costs something to produce. "And," she said, "you will try to remember, not just me, all of it. The people at the edges of rooms, the ones who stand by the fountain. They matter." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have been alone for a very long time. Not because I could not find company, but because I had stopped believing that anyone would see me, I suppose, as something other than what I am." He paused. "You saw me in a ditch, and you gave me your coat, and you argued my case in a court of law using a footnote in archaic German. I think you may be the most formidable person I have met in 3 centuries." "Only 3?" she said. "The first century was quiet," he said. "I did not get out much." She laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere unguarded, and it made the gas lamps seem, briefly, warmer. 6 months later, they stood in the garden of the Palais Sareni on a May evening, with the elder of the old court present and the Countess Aurelia Dravek as witness, and they made vows that were neither entirely mortal nor entirely of the old compact, something new, negotiated between them over many evenings in the library, with a great deal of disagreement and several revised drafts. The Countess cried, which she denied afterward. The presiding elder recorded the union in the old court's books with the careful precision of someone who understood that they were writing something that would be read for a very long time. Mireille wore her own dress, not borrowed, not gifted. She had made it herself from fabric she had chosen, because she was not 19, and she was not starting over, and she was not in need of rescue. She was a woman of 31 who had translated her way through 3 years of difficulty and found a footnote that changed everything, and she dressed accordingly. Sereni, for his part, had been trying to remember. He had taken to writing things down, not because his memory failed him, but because, as he said, he had been careless for centuries, and carelessness was a habit, and habits required conscious effort to break. He had a small notebook in his coat pocket on their wedding day, and in it, in very precise handwriting, was a description of a garden party in 1867, a girl of 19 standing near the fountain, watching him with an expression he had not noticed at the time, and was trying now to reconstruct from what he knew of her. He had not managed it yet, but he was working on it. 2 years after the union, Mireille received a commission from a publisher in Prague, a collection of documents from the old compact archives, to be translated into French, Italian, and modern German, for a scholarly audience interested in the history of supernatural law. It was, the publisher noted, an unusual subject for a translator of her background. She wrote back that she had come to the subject through personal experience, and that she believed it deserved rigorous attention. The commission led to another, and then to a position she had not anticipated, consultant to the old court itself, in matters where mortal law and compact law intersected. It was not a position that had existed before. She had, in effect, invented it, the way she had a tendency to invent things, by noticing what was needed and then doing it. On a Tuesday evening in November, 2 years to the week since she had opened her door to a man with amber eyes and a very good coat, she sat in the library of the Palais Sereni with her translation work spread across the table and Sereni across from her, working through the same records they had begun with, now for different reasons. He looked up. She looked up. The library was warm, which it had not been when she first came to it, because she had complained about the cold with sufficient persistence that he had arranged for better heating, which had taken some negotiation since the Palais had not been meaningfully heated in 40 years. "You are thinking about something," he said. "I am always thinking about something," she said. "It is a persistent condition." This something specifically. She set down her pen. "I was thinking about the garden party," she said. 1867. You by the fountain. Me, watching you from across the lawn and wondering who you were." He was quiet. He reached into his coat and produced the small notebook. He opened it to the page he had been working on. The reconstruction, the description he had been building from inference and from knowing her. He turned it so she could read it. He had not described the girl of 19. He had described the woman she had become, the quality of attention, the precision, the capacity for both stubbornness and generosity. And at the bottom, in smaller handwriting, he had written, "She would have been watching the fountain because everyone else was watching each other. She notices what others overlook. She always has." Mireille read it. She read it again. "You still don't remember me," she said. "No," he said, "but I know you now. And I think—" He paused, choosing the words with the care of someone for whom words had always mattered. "I think knowing you now is worth more than remembering you then, because then I was not paying attention, and now I am." She reached across the table and turned the notebook back toward him. She took his pen and, beneath what he had written, added 4 words in her own hand. "You found me anyway." He read them. He looked up at her. The lamp between them was steady and warm, and the library smelled of old paper and beeswax, and outside the November rain had begun again. The quiet, accumulating kind. The kind that settles rather than falls, as if it has nowhere better to be. He closed the notebook. He put it in his pocket, where it would stay. And she knew it would stay, because he had been keeping it carefully for 2 years, and she had learned by now that when Nikolai Zareni decided something mattered, he kept it with the same patient permanence he brought to everything. The slow, deliberate attention of a man who had finally, after several centuries, stopped being careless. She reached across the table, and he took her hand, and neither of them said anything more, because the rain was soft against the windows, and the work was there when they wanted it, and some things did not require words to be complete.